what does it truly mean to be alone? For many, the word solitude carries an uncomfortable shadow. It is often mistaken for loneliness, for emptiness, for the absence of connection. In popular culture, to be alone is to be incomplete, to be somehow lacking. Yet if we look deeper into the lives of history's most profound thinkers, creators, and visionaries, we find a very different story. For them, solitude was not a curse, but a choice. It was not a prison, but a sanctuary. It was the ground in which creativity and wisdom could take root. In this opening chapter, we begin to explore why solitude is not loneliness, but freedom, and why some of the most intelligent minds have often chosen silence over noise. Arthur Schopenhauer, the 19th century philosopher, believed that solitude reveals a person's true strength. According to him, the individual who cannot bear to be alone is dependent on the external world for meaning, while the one who embraces solitude demonstrates independence of thought. In society, we are constantly pulled by other people's expectations, distracted by their judgments, and carried away by their desires. In solitude, we finally meet ourselves, not the masks we wear in public, but the inner reality we often hide even from ourselves. For Schopenhauer, to step into solitude was not to withdraw from life, but to engage with it at its most authentic level. This might sound abstract, but think of how often we avoid being alone. We fill our days with conversations, music, endless scrolling, and ceaseless busyness. Silence frightens us, because in silence the mind begins to speak, and what it says is not always easy to hear. Yet what frightened many, Schopenhauer celebrated. He saw solitude as a kind of training ground for the mind, a place where wisdom, independence, and creativity could emerge. When the outside world becomes quiet, the inner world grows louder. And in that inner world lie ideas, questions, and insights that cannot be born in the constant noise of social life. Consider the difference between loneliness and solitude. Loneliness is a state of lack. We long for connection, but it is missing. It is painful because it reminds us of what we desire but do not have. Solitude, on the other hand, is chosen. It is not born of emptiness, but of fullness. When we are in solitude, we are not deprived of connection. Rather, we are free from distraction. Loneliness says, I am empty without others. Solitude says, I am whole enough to be with myself. This difference is more than words. It is a difference in how we experience life itself. The great thinkers of history understood this well. Isaac Newton, during the Great Plague of London, retreated to the countryside. It was there, away from the bustle of the city, that he developed his most groundbreaking ideas, the foundations of calculus, the theory of gravity, and the laws of motion. Charles Darwin spent years in quiet observation, walking alone, reflecting, and writing before presenting the theory of evolution. Friedrich Nietzsche withdrew repeatedly into solitude to wrestle with his boldest ideas. Carl Jung, the psychologist, built a retreat where he could separate himself from society to think and create. These individuals did not discover their insights in crowded halls or noisy gatherings, but in the silence of their own company. But solitude is not only for philosophers and scientists. It is for anyone who seeks clarity in a chaotic world. Think about modern life. Every moment is filled with notifications, messages, demands, and obligations. Rarely do we pause long enough to listen to ourselves. Yet when we step into solitude, even briefly, we begin to notice things that otherwise remain hidden. Thoughts connect more clearly. Emotions reveal their depth. Ideas take shape without being interrupted. In this sense, solitude is not a luxury, but a necessity. It is a natural state of the human mind, one that allows us to recharge and reorient. Why then do we fear it? Perhaps because solitude demands courage. When you are alone, there is no one to distract you from your own thoughts. There is no external noise to drown out the questions that lie beneath the surface. Many people spend their lives running from this confrontation. They chase constant stimulation because silence threatens to reveal truths they are not ready to face. But those who embrace solitude discover that facing these truths brings not despair, but freedom. It is in solitude that we recognize who we truly are beyond social roles, expectations, and illusions. This is why solitude can feel like a hidden power. To be comfortable with one's own company is to be unshaken by the opinions of others. To create in silence is to generate ideas untouched by convention. To reflect without interruption is to see patterns invisible to the restless crowd. Solitude does not cut us off from the world. It prepares us to return to it with deeper insight. It is a wellspring of originality and independence, available to anyone brave enough to claim it. In this video, we invite you to step with us into that space, to see solitude not as absence, but as presence. The presence of your own thoughts, the presence of your true self, the presence of a deeper freedom that is easily overlooked in daily life. We will explore the insights of Schopenhauer, the practices of great thinkers, and the findings of modern psychology, all of which affirm that solitude is not a weakness, but a profound strength. If you have ever felt like an outsider, if you have ever sensed that silence tells the truth more clearly than the endless noise of society, this journey is for you. You are not alone in seeking solitude. You are in the company of minds that change the world by stepping away from it. And in this first chapter, we begin to uncover the hidden power of being alone. Arthur Schopenhauer, often called the philosopher of pessimism, had a view of life that unsettled many of his contemporaries. He believed that human existence was driven by an endless striving, a blind, irrational force he named the will. According to him, this will pushed us constantly toward desires, ambitions, and needs that could never be fully satisfied. In this constant chasing, people were trapped in a cycle of restlessness, dissatisfaction, and pain. For Schopenhauer, solitude offered one of the few escapes from this cycle. Solitude was not merely a personal preference, it was a philosophical necessity. To Schopenhauer, most people lived on the surface of life. They sought entertainment, social validation, and approval because it distracted them from the deeper truth, that existence itself was marked by suffering. He argued that when people gather in groups, they tend to reinforce illusions. They talk, gossip, and compete, constantly distracting themselves from the reality of their condition. The philosopher, however, does not fear being alone. Instead, he embraces solitude because in solitude, he is free from the trivialities of the crowd. Alone, he can pursue wisdom, cultivate creativity, and experience life without the constant distortion of social noise. Schopenhauer once wrote that a man can be himself only so long as he is alone. As soon as he enters society, he becomes a fraction of himself, shaped by external expectations and pressures. In solitude, the individual's mind can stretch out to its full dimensions. This was not arrogance, but insight. He saw how much of human behavior is driven by the fear of standing apart. People hide in the crowd because they fear the silence of self-reflection. Yet in hiding, they never truly meet themselves. Solitude, in Schopenhauer's philosophy, is the path to authenticity. One of his most striking ideas was the distinction between the ordinary person and the genius. The ordinary person, according to Schopenhauer, depends on society for stimulation and purpose. Their thoughts rarely rise above the concerns of the day. The genius, by contrast, finds within himself an inner richness. He needs solitude because his imagination, his questions, and his visions cannot find nourishment in the trivial concerns of the majority. The genius is not antisocial by nature, but he understands that creativity flourishes in silence. Schopenhauer believed that the more intelligent a person is, the more inclined he will be toward solitude.
This idea explains why some of history's greatest minds deliberately withdrew from society. Their retreat was not an act of misanthropy, but an act of preservation. Schopenhauer argued that genius is like a delicate plant that cannot thrive in the trampling of crowds. It requires space, quiet, and time. And so, solitude becomes not just a preference, but a condition for the birth of great ideas. Yet Schopenhauer was careful to point out that solitude is not easy. To enter solitude is to confront the self without distraction. For the unprepared mind, this can be terrifying. All the doubts, regrets, and anxieties that are normally drowned out by noise rise to the surface. Many people run from this confrontation, which is why they fill their lives with endless activity. The philosopher, however, accepts it. He understands that to know oneself is to endure discomfort. In solitude, one learns to sit with questions that have no immediate answer, to face one's limitations, and to discover the depth of one's own mind. Schopenhauer often criticized the shallow pleasures of society, the pursuit of wealth, the craving for status, the chatter of gossip. He considered these distractions symptoms of people fleeing from themselves. True strength, in his view, was the ability to turn inward and find satisfaction in one's own thoughts. This did not mean rejecting the world entirely. Schopenhauer was not suggesting permanent isolation. Rather, he emphasized balance, to engage with society when necessary, but to withdraw when one's mind required nourishment. The wise individual knows when to step back into solitude, just as a wise sailor knows when to retreat from the storm. Another key aspect of Schopenhauer's philosophy is his view of art and contemplation. He believed that through aesthetic experience, music, literature, visual art, individuals could momentarily step outside the suffering caused by the will. Art provided a glimpse into a timeless realm beyond desire and struggle. Solitude, therefore, was the condition that allowed such aesthetic experiences to deepen. Alone, one could lose themselves in music or art and touch something eternal. In this sense, solitude was not barren. It was fertile ground for transcendence. Modern readers might find Schopenhauer's view world harsh, but his insights into solitude remain strikingly relevant. Today, we live in a culture of constant connection. Phones buzz, social media updates stream endlessly, and silence feels almost unnatural. Schopenhauer's philosophy reminds us that this very discomfort with being alone is a symptom of dependence. If we cannot bear our own company, what does that say about our relationship with ourselves? He would argue that true independence begins only when we can sit alone without needing distraction. Schopenhauer also believed that solitude revealed the measure of one's character. In society, it is easy to play roles, to conform, to impress others. Alone, there is no audience, no applause, no recognition. Who are you when no one is watching? For him, this was the ultimate test. The shallow person feels empty in solitude because he has no inner life to draw upon. The deeper individual feels alive because solitude gives him space to explore the vast landscapes of his own mind. For Schopenhauer, solitude was not about rejecting humanity, but about elevating it. He recognized that society is necessary. We are social beings after all. But he warned against making it the sole foundation of meaning. True wisdom required stepping back, reflecting, and seeing life with a clarity that constant social engagement cannot provide. Solitude was the philosopher's laboratory, the artist's studio, the thinker's sanctuary. In the end, Schopenhauer saw solitude as the foundation of authenticity, independence, and creativity. It was the space where illusions fell away and truth could be glimpsed. He did not romanticize it. He acknowledged its difficulty, but he insisted that those who avoided solitude condemned themselves to superficiality. To embrace solitude was to claim one's hidden power, the ability to think deeply, to create freely, and to live authentically. Thus, Schopenhauer's philosophy of solitude challenges us even today. Are we capable of being alone without fear? Can we cultivate an inner world rich enough to sustain us without constant external validation? If so, we may discover that solitude is not the absence of life, but the very ground in which a deeper life begins.
When we look at the history of human thought, a striking pattern emerges. The ideas that shaped entire civilizations, the theories that revolutionized science, the works of art and philosophy that continue to inspire us centuries later. Many of these were born not in crowded marketplaces or bustling academies, but in the silence of solitude. Great minds across history have often chosen isolation, not because they despised humanity, but because they needed the freedom to think beyond its boundaries. In this chapter, we explore how solitude played a decisive role in the lives of Newton, Darwin, Nietzsche, Jung, and others who reshaped the world. Perhaps the most famous story of solitude leading to discovery is that of Isaac Newton during the Great Plague of London in 1665. Forced to leave Cambridge as the city closed down, Newton returned to his family home in Woolsthorpe. What might have been a wasted year for many became his annus mirabilis, his year of wonders. Alone in the countryside, without the distractions of lectures or peers, Newton developed the foundations of calculus, explored the nature of light and optics, and formulated the law of universal gravitation. The famous tale of the apple falling from a tree symbolizes this period. While the world outside was gripped by fear and death, Newton's solitude gave birth to some of the most enduring ideas in science. His retreat demonstrates Schopenhauer's point. Solitude can be a crucible for independence and creativity. Charles Darwin's theory of evolution by natural selection was not the product of a single journey, but of decades of quiet observation and reflection. After returning from the voyage of the Beagle, Darwin did not rush to publish. Instead, he withdrew into his home, Down House, where he spent over 20 years studying plants, animals, and fossils. He walked the same paths in his garden daily, thinking in solitude, allowing ideas to mature slowly. His theory demanded patience, reflection, and freedom from distraction. Darwin's long solitude was not inactivity, it was incubation. Out of it emerged one of the most transformative scientific ideas of all time, reshaping biology and our understanding of life itself. The German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche embodied the solitary thinker. Throughout his life, his health forced him into periods of isolation, but he also sought solitude deliberately. He wrote in remote villages in Switzerland and Italy, often living alone for months. Nietzsche believed that only in solitude could he confront the most radical questions of existence, the death of God, the revaluation of values, the concept of eternal recurrence. His works were not the product of academic consensus or public debate, but of long, solitary struggles with thought. He warned that anyone who seeks to create new values must first step away from the herd, from the comforting illusions of society. For Nietzsche, solitude was not an escape, it was a battlefield where he wrestled with truth. The psychologist Carl Jung understood the necessity of solitude both for personal growth and for creativity. After his break with Freud, Jung entered a period of deep introspection. He built a retreat on the shores of Lake Zurich, which he called the Bollingen Tower. There, away from professional obligations and social pressures, Jung engaged in what he called active imagination, exploring dreams, symbols, and the unconscious. His solitude was not idleness, but a dialogue with the deepest layers of the psyche. Out of this period came many of his groundbreaking ideas about archetypes, the collective unconscious, and individuation. Jung's retreat illustrates how solitude can serve as a laboratory of the inner world. The pattern extends beyond these well-known figures. Albert Einstein, though sociable at times, often emphasized the need for solitude in his creative life. He described himself as a loner and admitted that much of his thinking was done in quiet reflection rather than in noisy debate. Emily Dickinson, one of the greatest poets in American literature, lived most of her life in near seclusion,
Yet her poetry reveals an inner world of extraordinary richness. Nikola Tesla spent long hours alone in thought, envisioning inventions that seemed impossible to others. In each case, solitude did not mean barrenness. It meant fertile ground for ideas. What unites these figures is the rhythm of withdrawal and return. They stepped away from society not to abandon it, but to return with something new. Newton emerged from his solitude with the laws of physics. Darwin returned with a theory that changed our understanding of life. Nietzsche offered a philosophy that challenged moral foundations. Jung provided tools for exploring the unconscious. Each of them contributed profoundly to humanity precisely because they had the courage to step into silence. It is important to note that solitude alone does not guarantee greatness. Not everyone who isolates themselves produces world-changing insights. But for those already inclined toward deep thought, solitude creates the conditions in which ideas can flourish. It is the soil in which seeds of genius take root. Without time alone, many of the most revolutionary ideas of history might never have come into being. These historical examples remind us that solitude is not a weakness to be feared, but a resource to be embraced. In a culture that prizes constant communication, activity, and visibility, it can feel counterintuitive to step back. Yet the lives of these great minds suggest that if we wish to think deeply, create freely, or discover something new, we must at times withdraw. Solitude is the crucible of originality. It is where we meet ourselves, and in meeting ourselves, we sometimes meet ideas that can change the world.
In our own time, the subject of solitude has moved from the realm of philosophy into the realm of science. Where Schopenhauer and Nietzsche spoke from intuition and reflection, modern psychology now provides evidence-based insights that confirm much of what the great thinkers already suspected. Solitude, when chosen consciously, is not harmful but profoundly beneficial. In fact, in a world of constant noise, digital distraction, and relentless social interaction, solitude may be more necessary than ever for mental health, creativity, and self-understanding. Psychologists distinguish clearly between loneliness and solitude. Loneliness is involuntary and painful. It is the distressing feeling of being isolated when one desires connection. Solitude, by contrast, is voluntary. It is chosen time away from others, often used for reflection, rest, or creative activity. Studies show that people who are capable of enjoying solitude tend to have higher levels of self-esteem, stronger emotional regulation, and a deeper sense of autonomy. Rather than weakening social bonds, solitude can strengthen them by allowing the individual to return refreshed and more authentic. Research in developmental psychology reveals that the ability to be alone begins in childhood. Children who learn to play independently often display greater creativity and problem-solving skills. By contrast, those who are constantly stimulated or distracted may struggle to generate original ideas. This pattern extends into adulthood. The modern emphasis on constant connectivity through smartphones, social media, and endless communication leaves little space for the mind to wander freely. Yet, psychologists have found that periods of solitude promote what is called constructive daydreaming, a mental state linked with creativity and future planning. Neuroscience adds another dimension to our understanding of solitude. Brain imaging studies show that when people are not focused on external tasks, the default mode network of the brain becomes active. This network is associated with self-reflection, memory consolidation, and imagining future scenarios. In other words, when we are alone and seemingly doing nothing, the brain is in fact engaging in some of its most important work. Solitude allows this network to operate without interruption, enabling deeper self-awareness and innovative thinking. Contemporary psychology also emphasizes the restorative power of solitude. In today's fast-paced environment, many suffer from stress, burnout, and overstimulation. Research shows that time spent in solitude, especially in nature, reduces cortisol levels,
lowers blood pressure, and improves mood. The Japanese practice of Shinrin-yoku, or forest bathing, has been studied extensively, revealing that time alone among trees enhances immune function and mental clarity. Solitude, then, is not only a mental discipline, but also a biological necessity, helping the body and mind recover from constant demands. Creativity research provides further evidence. Many artists, writers, and scientists describe their most important breakthroughs as emerging from quiet moments alone. Psychological experiments confirm this, showing that individuals working in solitude often generate more original ideas than those working in groups subject to social pressure. Brainstorming sessions, once thought to be the pinnacle of creative collaboration, have repeatedly been shown to produce fewer novel ideas than solitary reflection. This aligns perfectly with the examples of Newton, Darwin, or Dickinson. Solitude nurtures originality by removing the subtle constraints of social conformity. Modern clinical psychology even uses solitude as a therapeutic tool. Mindfulness meditation, which involves sitting quietly and focusing on the present moment, has become one of the most researched interventions for reducing anxiety and depression. Cognitive behavioral therapies encourage clients to spend time in reflective solitude to examine thoughts and emotions without distraction. For individuals who fear being alone, gradually learning to embrace solitude can be transformative, turning fear into resilience. Of course, modern psychology also warns against extremes. Just as too little solitude leaves us overstimulated, too much enforced isolation can harm mental health. The global lockdowns of recent years highlighted this reality. Involuntary isolation often produces loneliness, anxiety, and depression. The key, according to researchers, lies in choice. When solitude is chosen and balanced with healthy social connection, it becomes enriching. When it is imposed without consent, it can be destructive. Thus, the difference between solitude and loneliness is not simply about being alone, but about whether one experiences that aloneness as freedom or as deprivation. Another important contribution of modern psychology is the idea that solitude enhances authenticity. Social life inevitably involves masks, roles, and adaptations. We speak differently to colleagues, family, and strangers, often bending to expectations. Solitude offers a rare opportunity to drop these masks and reconnect with one's authentic self. Studies show that people who regularly spend time alone report a greater sense of personal identity and life satisfaction. They are less likely to conform blindly to external pressures and more likely to make choices aligned with their true values. The therapeutic potential of solitude extends to spirituality and existential psychology. Viktor Frankl, a survivor of the concentration camps and founder of logotherapy, emphasized the importance of meaning in human life. He observed that those who could endure solitude often tapped into a deeper sense of purpose. Modern psychologists echo this insight, noting that solitude provides space for existential reflection, questions of who we are, what we value, and what we ultimately live for. Without solitude, such questions are drowned in the everyday noise of tasks and conversations. In the digital age, the need for solitude becomes even more pressing. Social media platforms encourage constant sharing, comparison, and validation seeking. Psychologists warn that this constant external orientation erodes self-esteem and fosters anxiety. Solitude acts as an antidote. By stepping away from the endless stream of images and opinions, one reclaims the ability to think independently and to cultivate an inner life that is not dependent on likes, comments, or approval. In this way, solitude is not a retreat from life, but a reclamation of it. What emerges from all this research is a picture remarkably consistent with Schopenhauer's insight. Solitude is not a weakness, but a hidden strength. It fosters independence of mind, emotional resilience, creativity, and authenticity. It provides rest for the body, clarity for the mind, and renewal for the spirit. Far from being an outdated philosophical ideal, solitude is now recognized by psychology and neuroscience as essential for human flourishing. As we reflect on these findings, a challenge arises. Can we, in our own lives, create space for solitude? Can we learn to put down our devices, step away from the constant demands of communication, and sit quietly enough to hear our own thoughts? Psychology suggests that the answer is not only yes, but that doing so is vital. To embrace solitude is to embrace freedom. Freedom from noise, from conformity, from distraction. And in that freedom, we discover the power to live more fully, more creatively, and more authentically.